Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of The Village and The Fog of the Harbinger series, and a whole bunch of other books, including nonfiction novels, nonfiction books, and a whole bunch of novels.
And I'm Molly Jo Riley, producer of the podcast. I am a creator, author of The Unemployment Cookbook, Social Media Ninja, and current work in progress, NOLA.
And a reminder to those of you listening to the audio only, you can watch us live Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where you can jump into our chat room and fire off some questions for us and participate in our oh-so-lively discussions, which are always fun. So if you friend us, or what do? Add us on your Google Plus or Circles or whatever
Add into a circle.
There you go. So my social media ninja knows. But if you do that, firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's plural, firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Then when we send out our invites, you'll get those as well. You can also send us email there in case you want to talk to us that way. And we're pretty good about responding to those emails when they come in. So don't be afraid to send those in, and we'll explain to you why you cannot write a nonfiction novel, no matter how much you try. Though some would argue that In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is a nonfiction novel. Definitely reads like a novel.
Yeah, an author named
and it is nonfiction.
Stone did one on Charles Darwin, and he wrote it as a novel, sort of the adventures of Charles Darwin. And so
that's
fantastic. Well, it's also like some of the faith-based movies that come out. There's a lot of added dialogue and things, so you're not really getting history. You're getting an interpretation of things.
Right.
Right. So
we also want to encourage people for Ask the Author.
Absolutely, we do. We've gotten a couple more questions that have come in via social media. Thank you for those. Don't hesitate to send us more. I really enjoy these Ask the Author questions. Gives us a little I guess diversion, so we're not so monotonous with kind of the same topic. So it's nice that way. And speaking of Ask the Author questions, our Ask the Author question tonight comes from Therese Moore, who says, which comes first, the plot or the character? And that for me is very much a chicken or the egg kind of a question, and so it's really difficult. It really depends on who you ask. There are some who are going to swear up and down that it's the character. There are some who are going to swear up and down that it's the plot. For me, I love the idea of starting with a character, somebody like a monk or a Sean from Psych. Some really intriguing characters that are fun, and pretty much any situation you put them in is going to be interesting. And so I like to see those. But I would say that most what we would term commercial fiction, I'm using the finger quotes because sometimes that gets a negative rap or a bad rap. Like it's not as good as literature, but it can be just as good. But the commercial fiction that you're writing a novel that you want to sell several copies, thousands and millions of copies, most of that starts with plot, I would say. I think the best stories can hatch either from the character or the plot, just so long as you don't only develop one. You've got to develop both. Most literary short stories that you're going to read in colleges and analysis classes are very much character-driven, but you'll look at Ray Bradbury, which is very much plot-driven. Not to say that his characters are underdeveloped, because you take a book like Fahrenheit 451, which is really built around the idea of burning books, and it's a commentary on society's addiction to television and the role that books play in our society and all that. But you've got Montag there, and it's an interesting choice to choose a fireman whose job it is to set fires and burn books, because his change is going to be the most compelling to the reader. His is going to be the story that we're going to most sympathize with. And so you can't really have one without the other. I guess you could. You just wouldn't have a very good story that way. It's a very long answer for a very short question, and I'm not sure I've enlightened it at all. So, Pops, I'm going to throw it over to you and hope that you can make some more sense out of it than I have.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on it in just a second, but you mentioned Ray Bradbury, and he wrote, whoops, wrong side, on a typewriter like the one behind me. Paid 10 cents an hour to use it. He nickel and dimed his way through it. You can read the whole account of that in his Zen and the Art of Writing, which is a fabulous book. And he's great when he talks about that, but he's got a chapter in there about that book and how he used a library typewriter
Wow.
to get to it. And one of the things you hit on, it makes me think about something I encounter all the time when teaching at writers' conferences and talking to new writers, is there's this false dichotomy we make between, are you an intuitive writer or are you an outliner? Is this literary or is this commercial? Is it plot driven or is it character driven? And I don't buy into that at all. I think those are just artificial categories that should be ignored. Am I an outliner or an intuitive writer? I am what I need to be for that project. Do I start with the character or do I start with the plot? It doesn't matter. I really don't know from book to book which is going to trigger it. It is often, in my case, the character. The character will come up and knock on my door, and I'm going to do something with them. Sometimes, like Ship Possessed and others, it's the overall story, but a submarine that comes back 50 years late without its crew, but it did not come back alone, and that's all I had on it. But I had the concept, and then the characters began to populate it. For my book Wounds, the primary character arrived first before I had a full plot. I had a basic idea. So really what I want to say in all of that is don't get tied up in those kinds of things or try to make them in sets of rules. Do what comes to you. From my years in architecture, I learned this simple little truth, that rigid things break and flexible things bend. They stand. That's why skyscrapers sway in the wind or in earthquakes. They're designed to do that. If they didn't sway, you would get to the ground a whole lot faster than you would normally. So they're designed to bend a little bit, and that's what we have to be as creative people. Sometimes it's going to be the character. Sometimes it's going to be the plot. Which is better? The one that gets it done.
Yeah, I agree. I worked in a building that, in the high winds, it just moved back and forth, and we had a really windy day, and they sent me home because we couldn't keep the power on. But it was really weird. It felt like an unending earthquake to be in one of the top floors, and it was just this thing for
a bit
hours.
of trivia on the really tall ones.
Wow.
They put in large either slabs of concrete or slabs of metal on the top floor, and it dampens that. So when the building sways, the counter to that is this huge, how many tons? I don't know how many tons, but it's a lot, depending on the size of the building, and it keeps it from swaying too much.
Wow.
But you have to have some flexibility, but you don't want to be so flexible that you fall down every time you try to stand up. So,
yeah. How about you, Molly? Plot or character first?
Yes.
All right,
It depends. I agree. It really depends on what it is that's being written. There are times, honestly, where I'll just wake up and I've had a little scene in my head where I already know the characters and the environment and the first start of the plot. With NOLA, I started with a general idea. I didn't even really have a plot. It was just a general idea. And with that came the kind of characters that you'd have to have in order to write the story that I'm writing. So for me, I think it really just depends on what's being written. And the more the characters influence and vice versa, the more the entire story is going to be developed. I think they're interdependent upon each other. You can't say develop the character first or develop the plot first, because the more you develop the character, that character, he or she, is going to say, this wouldn't happen in my world, or this would happen differently in my world. And it's up to the characters and the plot to work together.
I agree. Well said.
Thank you.
So we're all in agreement that we have no good solid answer for that. Or I guess the answer is depends on the project. User's preference. I do wonder if it has something to do with the length of the project as well, because I know most of my short stories are more character-driven. Characters show up first, whereas my longer works are usually plot-driven. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Have you found that to be true, Pops?
No, but then I don't make that distinction. I'm really a stickler about, if it's character driven or not. You don't have a story if you don't have character. So all stories character driven. You might, if you're writing a thriller, have more action than you would say if you were doing, you know, um, Weep No More, My Lady, or some literary piece.
Mm-hmm.
So the storyline, the action sometimes dictates whether people are going to call it literary or not. So I don't make that distinction. You don't have character, you don't have story.
Well
That's
said.
what Dave Fessenden is in the chat room, and he says right now, he said for him it seems to be the characters because they are the plot in a way, aren't they? And I agree with that. I think what you were just saying, it has to be character driven, but the characters really do come first, or a good portion thereof.
Well, we talked about that last week, right? The character motivation and the conflict is what stands between them. So even if it's as simple as I want to tell the story of a man who wants a glass of water and there's a ninja between him and the sink. Okay, so the story, is it really about the ninja or is it about the man who wants the water? And so now, even though we don't know much about the man, we're going to start finding out about the man, and we're going to find out about the water, and we're going to find out about the ninja, and that's where the planning kind of takes place.
Right, and again, I don't think it's a choice you make. I think in your creativity and the subconscious gets to work. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show. It's what occurs to you that gets the creativity going. So if it's a situation, particular danger, if it's the what-if question, then run with it. That doesn't mean it's weaker or better than if you start with a character who really interests you, and then the plot idea comes along a little later. It doesn't matter, story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
otherwise you end up being like the centipede who can't move because he forgot which leg to move first.
Yeah.
You just get it's the paralysis of analysis. Just take what comes to you and then go with that.
There you go. So whatever comes first is what comes first. So we are in our final week of March, and that means it's a wildcard week. So this is always exciting and fascinating. And this week we're looking at words to write by, which is our favorite writing quotes. And I don't know, I guess maybe not our favorite writing quotes, but quotes that we enjoy, quotes that perhaps excite us in some way or motivate us. And so we've each selected 5, and we'll see how many we can get through here. But we're going to kind of take turns here and talk about our favorite quotes. And so when I approaching this one, I consciously did not select the quotes that I know offhand, the ones that I'm always saying on the show, because I figured that would just be like watching reruns. And so I went out and I chose some new ones that I came across and I thought were pretty special, pretty important. And the first one I came across was from some guy named Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, something like that. He says, "We are all apprentices in a craft where no one ever becomes a master." And what I like about that is, if you've listened to this show for very long, you know I'm an advocate of education. And the best education that you can ever receive is practice. It would be, it would be obscene for us to think of the best guitar player on the planet who decides to stop playing guitar because he's already a master and now he doesn't need to practice anymore. That seems obscene. Professional football players still practice every week. Even the ones who are at the top of their games, they're not sitting out at practice. They continue to develop their craft. Writing is no different. When you think you've learned everything that you can about the craft of writing, go get another craft book. There's something else out there. Listen to a great podcast called Firsts in Fiction. You'll learn something new, I'm sure. But there's always something else. And I find that really inspiring because it shows me that my journey is not yet done. And the best study for me now is practice. So I like that quote.
That's a good quote.
And I think the more serious you are about the writing, the more discontent you'll have over what you write. I mean, it's good enough to send off. You're happy you do it, and it's published, but there's always a part of you going, I could have done that one just a little bit better. Or you get a really great idea for the story 2 months after it's on the shelves. So, but that's what you want. You want to keep challenging yourself and moving on. Yeah, Ernest Hemingway, wasn't he the buddy of Fitzgerald or something? F. Scott or?
Let's not use the term buddy.
Well, they started off as friends.
Yeah, that was Hemingway's MO, though, was to make friends with a writer who was better and more well-known than him, and then once he got more famous than them, he would kind of kick them to the curb. He'd say things like, I don't know who Fitzgerald is. We never talk. We have all these letters between the two of you. Yeah, I never talked to him. But the evidence, and I don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
I'm gonna go kill some animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going hunting. I taught Fitzgerald everything he needs to know. So, but yeah, he did that. He had, and that's another thing, another point. As much as I malign Ernest Hemingway, he made friends with writers that he admired, and he studied at their feet, so to speak. Continued to study the craft, and so that's, a mark in the good column for Ernest Hemingway. So, how about you, Pops?
That's what he did in Paris. Well, my first quote comes from E.B. White of Charlotte's Web fame, but he's known mostly to writers as Elements of Style. Strunk and White. He's the White of Strunk and White. Little bitty
he's
book.
Not the Strunk?
He's not the Strunk. He's the White.
I thought he was the Strunk.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to mute you here in just a second. Don't
Sorry,
make me
I'll be
mute
quiet
you.
now.
But anyway, he, of course, is well known for that book, probably more than anything else that he wrote. But he was a great writer. And this kind of goes along with what you're talking about, Aaron. He said, "A careful and honest writer does not need to worry about style. As he becomes proficient in the use of the language, his style will emerge, because he himself will emerge. And when this happens, he will find it increasingly easy to break through the barriers that separate him from other minds, other hearts, which is, of course, the purpose of writing, as well as its principal reward." I mean, that's just a finely crafted paragraph to begin with. No clutter in it or anything like that. But what I really like about it is that writing and learning to write is a process. As you mentioned, we don't really master it. We might do a spectacular job on a particular book, but once we put page 1 in for the next book, it's all starting over again. We use what we learned, but there's more and more to learn because it's an ever-evolving thing. So every work we undertake is a different jungle to explore. It's a higher mountain to climb. And then I think what I wanted to get across in this, and I think this is what he was trying to get across in this, though at that particular point he's talking about style, because new writers always worry about their style. Your style comes to you. You don't pick a style. It comes from writing over and over and over again, and then pretty soon it comes to the forefront. But the point in all of this is writers are self-made. They are not born. You learn the process.
Well said. Yeah, I had not seen that quote before you put it in the show notes, and that might have to go up on my wall. I'd love to put that in my classroom wall. I don't know that anybody would be able to understand it, but I could teach him. We could teach him. So very well done. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a long sentence, but or 2 sentences, I think.
But good ones
good
though.
Quote.
Yeah. How about you, Molly?
My first quote is from Isaac Asimov. He said, "I write for the same reason I breathe, because if I didn't, I would die." I love that quote more than anything because it defines me. It defines the people I love to associate with that have such a passion for the craft of writing that everything, whether we're actively writing or watching a movie or eating lunch or going to Starbucks, everything has a foundation in writing. I could use this. I'm going to make notes. I see that person as a character. Everything in my world revolves around writing, whether I'm actually writing or not. And that quote actually really defines me. There was a period of time where I wasn't writing for close to a year and a half. This was probably 15 years ago. And one day I found some old journals, and I happened to look through them, or scrapbooks of writing, and I thought, well, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write for even just half a page, a paragraph. it took half an hour, and it was really hard to get back into the habit of it. But when I did, it felt really good just to be that creative again. And later that day, I saw a friend of mine who said, "Hey, what happened to you today? You know, you're so much better. You're so much healthier now." And I'm like, "Okay, I wrote for like half an hour, and he told me don't ever stop writing." And that was one of the things that I've kept with me. I notice I don't let the anxieties of the regular world get to me if I'm writing, because to control the world is to create a world that I have control over is so wonderful. But so that is my first quote.
And he was
He
he
was
was serious
prolific.
when he wrote this.
Yeah.
He was far beyond addiction when it came to writing. He locked himself away. We've talked about the 3 typewriters going, and his autobiography has 2 of them really. Is very interesting. He had an ego the size of Everest, and he probably deserved to have it. But he had a surgery, and he was worried about having his brain damaged during the surgery. I think it was a heart surgery, if memory serves.
Oh,
And he
wow.
told the doctor, "I suffer brain loss. If there's something wrong, and I'm not going to be able to think and write, then just let me go." Because that's all he ever wanted to do was write, and of course he set records in his writing for the number of books and the like. Most people don't realize most of his books are nonfiction. We think of his novels as science fiction, and he got to where he hated those. But nonetheless, he wrote day in and day out, and he didn't like to go outside. People would ask him for interviews. He'd say, "When am I going to write? I can't talk to you. What am I going to write?" A great quote.
That's great.
Have you guys ever met somebody with hypergraphia?
No.
Hypergraphia. It's an actual condition where it's hyper and then graph the writing, and they just cannot stop writing, and they'll write consistently and continually. Met somebody like that at Antioch, and they just had trunks and trunks and trunks of journals that were all filled. None of it usable, but just still publishing book after book after book, and that's all they could do was write, and it was a compulsion. It was an actual mental compulsion. But even if you don't have that, I think all of the great writers have something like it. Molly, your story makes me think of, I've shared this story on air before, but I come home and I'm just mad at the world, and Naomi says, "Have you had a chance to write today?" "No." "Why don't you go write for 10 minutes? So I go back to my room and type out 10, 15 minutes. I come back, and it's butterflies and rainbows and unicorns, and all is well with the world. But
Was
yeah,
it
it's
was it Balzac who he would write the end on one project, pull the paper out of the typewriter, put in another piece of paper, and type chapter 1 and start the next one? Never gave
Oh,
himself a
that's
break.
great. Wow.
He just, he's finished with one, time to move on to the next one, and he didn't even get out of the chair. I think that was him. Maybe someone in the room can correct me if I've got the wrong author there. So I'm getting old, so my brain doesn't always work.
yeah.
Who were you guys?
If you
I don't
if you
know.
can't think and write, should I just pull the plug in the future? Is this information I should know?
I
It's
don't know, Stan. I'm a little worried that you just pull it on principle.
just took a really weird turn.
You guys are
Actually,
scary
Doctor, I still
sometimes.
know
You're
him.
just really, really scary.
There's an 80% chance your father is going to survive. That's not good enough. Pull the plug.
Yeah, I'm bad with numbers. It's just I owe him money. Let him.
The odds are good.
Yeah. All right, moving back to writing quotes here.
Okay.
This one comes from Stephen King. Making people believe the unbelievable is no trick. It's work. Belief and reader absorption come in the details. An overturned tricycle in the gutter of an abandoned neighborhood can stand for everything. And there's several things I love about this quote. The first of all, making people believe the unbelievable is no trick. It's work. I love that. It's work. How many times do people want to become writers and they give up because they realize very quickly that it is work? It's another job, especially if you're doing the 2-job thing. You got the day job, you got the writing. That's 2 jobs. And it's work to make somebody believe the unbelievable. And I love that he also says that an overturned tricycle, just a little detail, an overturned tricycle in the gutter of an abandoned neighborhood can stand for everything.
I
It makes
love
me think.
that.
It makes me think of William Carlos Williams' The Red Wheelbarrow, the poem, which I will quote from memory for you now. So much
Okay.
depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't get that poem. It's a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside white chickens. Like, it means something when you have the length of a novel to empower those objects with some sort of symbolic meaning, or just the detail itself that paints a picture that creates a tone and a mood for your piece. Um, but you can't just put it in there and move on. Like, you've got to work toward that, and you've got to set that up. And so Carver says something very similar about the power of ordinary objects and empowering them through our writing. And I just love that. I try and do that in my own work, where I find a simple object and I try and make it become more than what it simply is. And it takes a lot of work to make that happen. It takes a lot of work to make that happen. Pops, you have another quote, or you want to say something? Hello?
Is he frozen?
He might be frozen. I'm so glad you said
He,
something, Molly, because I was starting to think it was me.
he looks frozen. Well,
Oh
oh, and then he's
no!
gone.
He
Okay,
had
well,
wonderful things to say.
we'll go
How about
on.
you, Molly?
You're dropping out on my internet side, so
Okay.
very stuck. I can hear you, but it's a frozen screen. I'll go on
Okay.
with my next quote is very simply, write every day. Stephen J. Cannell told me that, not just he said that's one of the reasons it's one of my favorite quotes is before he was a writer, a novelist, he created, produced, and wrote some of the greatest TV shows. The Rockford Files, Baa Black Sheep, the A-Team. He was really prolific in writing and creating. He knew how to really get people's attentions from the first second that the characters are on the screen. And he's just really good at it. So back in 2007, early 2007, I sent him an email and said, hey, do you have any advice for an aspiring writer to start a long-term career? And I never expected a reply. Well, of course, I got the form letter reply from his company that said, thanks for emailing, and it's not, we don't usually respond. But a few months later, I got another email from them that said, we've decided to use your question as on his video query. And what he does is he will post a little video, sort of like this podcast, but instead of live, it would just be a little 2-minute, 3-minute video that he would put in his video series for teaching and training other writers. And they used my question. And the most exciting thing about that for me is here it is, 9 years later, and that's still the #1 video on his website, and it's one of the top 5 on his YouTube channel. And yes, in essence, it's just write every day. By writing every day, even if you don't feel like it, you're still honing your craft. You're going to see how after a year you're going to get better at it. You're going to learn the tricks and tips, and you're going to know these things because you're not letting your writing muscle go into atrophy. So I really enjoy it. And also because when he was the first person outside of church to call me Molly Joe. Because I wasn't in the writing world a lot back then, and my family just all called me Molly, and at work it was all Molly. So only church people called me Molly Joe, and writing, but I didn't know a lot of writers then, and so he was the first one to publicly call me Molly Joe, and that was kind of a big deal for me too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, welcome back, Pops.
Yeah, what happened? We missed you.
Well, I thought it was you guys because you guys froze up on my side, but then I realized my internet had just dropped out. The wireless, and I'm not on wireless. It's my router. It hasn't done that in a long time, but it just bailed on me. Just one
Well,
of
you
those
should have heard
days.
what Aaron was saying about you, but I'm keeping my mouth shut.
Well, that's all right. It'll be on YouTube pretty quick, so I'll be able to track it down and
I'll
use
edit
it in
it.
court.
I'll edit it.
Okay.
So, well, Pops, we skipped your second quote for Molly Joe's, which was "write every day," and so we can get back on track with your next quote, unless you have something to say about my last one or hers.
No, we'll just move on to the next one here. And this is from William Zinsser, and everyone should have William Zinsser's book called On Writing. Excuse me, How to Write Well. That's the name of the book, How to Write Well. On Writing Well, that's what it is. It's On Writing Well. I'll get it yet. Apparently my mental router's offline too. While it's mostly nonfiction, it's got some great stuff. But he said this: fighting clutter is like fighting weeds. The writer is always slightly behind, and that is certainly true. It seems the single most difficult thing for new writers to learn is that, and it's far more difficult than mastering the semicolon, or the labyrinth of publishing terms and practices and the like, and that is to learn that not only is it okay, but it's desirable for you to go back over your manuscript and start ripping stuff out. I call it liposuction, literary liposuction. You want to take the fat out, you want to get rid of everything that doesn't belong, and get rid of that so that you don't have any clutter. And Al's axiom number 6, clutter is a prose killer. Now, what is clutter? It's any unnecessary words. We talked about pleonasm, tautology. So he stood up, but you can't stood down. So it's just he stood. Little things like that. Develop an eye for that and start cutting those out. And over time, it'll become second nature to you.
I just bumped into an old student of mine that I taught when he was in junior high. He is now married and has 3 children of his own, which is divine retribution. And he says, "You know what I remember about you?" And I hadn't seen him in I don't even know how many years, a decade. And I said, I'm just waiting for the worst possible thing to come out of his mouth. He goes, "Same exact." I can't stand when people say same exact anymore. Yeah. So redundant. I was like, that's what you remember from me from the year and a half that I taught? Okay, that's fine.
I do in advertising, exactly the same. Well, if it's exact, it's the same. If it's the same, it's exact. Otherwise, it's just similar.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, good times. I'm glad I've made an impression. But you're right. In my case, I, as a writer, am always behind both my weeds and my clutter, and so that's an apt analogy there. But yeah, definitely something that you have to watch for. The writing of a novel, my next quote is, the writing of a novel is taking life as it already exists, not to report it, but to make an object toward the end that the finished work might contain this life inside it and offer it to the reader. The essence will not be, of course, the same thing as the raw material. It is not even of the same family of those things. The novel is something that never was before and will not be again. Eudora Wheatley.
Wow.
Right? Like, I just read these and I just feel a little bit dumber, but also a little bit inspired. And so
yeah, I'm going to get offline now and write the next 5 chapters, like tonight.
There you go. But I love the idea. To me, this is, the channeling of life into an object. And I don't. I mean, you can't do that. You can't. There is no real way to channel somebody's life into another object, except through the novel. And that is, I think, our job as writers is that if we think of the novel as a container, that once you open it, it has a life inside of it, or several lives, as the case may be. And it's one of those things that once you've opened that, and you can close the book again, and you open it again, it's still not the same thing. It's going to be different each time. And there's nothing quite so satisfying as opening a book for the first time, having never read it, going in blind, as it were, and experiencing that life that is held within those pages. It's a very, I don't want to say mystical experience or a spiritual experience, but it's about as close as you can come to living somebody else's life. And I really, again, it speaks to the power of the novel, and that really inspires me, is when I think about, man, I'm creating these myself. That's what I find most exciting.
Definitely.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So, Pops.
This one's from the guy we mentioned before, Ray Bradbury, Zen and the Art of Writing. It's from page 35 of that. He says, what is the subconscious to others? And he capitalizes the and subconscious. He makes it like a person. what is the subconscious to every other man in its creative aspects becomes, for writers, the muse. And writers often talk about the muse, as do musicians. And as I thought about that and read that quote a few times, it occurs to me that sometimes writing isn't logical. Sometimes creativity grows in the soil of intuition and subconscious thoughts. Solutions, new ideas, plot turns pop up from the subconscious, and they can do so at any time. They can do so in the middle of the night while you're taking a shower, driving down the street, sitting in a restaurant. Back even in my preacher days, I recall a few times when I would be in the pulpit speaking, and an idea for something I was working on, would pop into my head in the middle of that while I was speaking out loud to a big group of people. And so there's a little portion of my brain saying, I've got to save this somehow and not miss a beat. You don't know when that subconscious comes about. Stephen King called them the boys in the basement in his book on writing, which I thought was funny. He described them as wearing dirty jeans, I think, and a white T-shirt, and a pack of Marlboros rolled up in their shirt sleeve with that. And he says, they come out when I get stuck. They come out of the basement. They kick the door down, come out and help me. And I find that most writers, when they get to a tough spot, if they'll stop, the subconscious will take over. And at some point, it will break down whatever is keeping us from seeing what we need to see. So I think Ray Bradbury's on the money there. The muse really isn't a person. It's not an intelligent. It's part of our subconscious that guides us, directs us, corrects us, beats us up when necessary, but keeps us on track.
And it's good to listen to that voice. It's good to listen to the muse.
Yeah.
You know, not to tune that out. So, or not to fill your mind with so many other things that you can't hear the muse. I think that's important too. Right. So, Molly, your next one. I just waited until you were drinking. Waited till your mouth was full.
Thanks, appreciate that.
It's what I do. It's what I do.
You have excellent timing. My next quote is thanks to Erin. It's Anne Lamott, and it's from her title book. The quote is, "Just take it bird by bird," and the book is Bird by Bird. This is not actually her quote. It's a quote that she overheard her father telling her brother, but she wrote it into the book. Basically about don't be overwhelmed with the whole project. Just take it one scene, one tiny section at a time. And in that same chapter where she talked about bird by bird, she also talked about just taking, when you're having trouble writing, look at it like a little 2-inch window. Just think of it as a little 2-inch window that you're trying to write that. You don't have to see the entire panoramic world outside. You don't have to do everything. Just the 2-inch window. What does this one leaf look like? What does this one bird flutter like? And it grows. Then you can shift the window. You don't even have to expand it. You just shift it to another part, and pretty soon you put those pieces together and you'll have the complete story. So when I look at my book and I'm working on NOLA and I'm only 2/3 done with the first draft and I know how the ending is, but I don't know how to get from here to there, that's okay. I can start with the ending or start with the one part that I know is going to instigate the ending, and the rest of it will fall into place.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Bird by Bird, and it's one of the inspiring books. I did get some good little tidbits about craft from it, but it's one of those books you want on your shelf for the bad days, where you hate yourself and you think you're writing just garbage, and you just think, I might as well give up. It's good to pick up Bird by Bird. She really helps in that. But you were mentioning the end of your book, and with Harrison Sawyer, I actually wrote the ending for the first time in my adult life, the first time ever writing. I wrote the end before I actually got there. It came to me, the muse, the boys in the basement, whatever you want to call them, kindly explained to me how the book was going to end, and so I wrote it so I wouldn't forget it, and then it kind of really helped flesh everything out, because I was able to go back and say, okay, I know where I'm going, and so now I know what road I need to take, and that really did help me kind of get over some writer's block that I experienced while writing that. So, very good quote. Very good quote.
Well, and it's one of the books that you recommended when you first started mentoring me. It was, in fact, the second craft book, the first being Flannery O'Connor's Mystery and Manners. So I have you to thank for both of those great, inspiring craft books.
I'd like to take credit. All I did was read them and go, wow, these people are smart. So all credit to them for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, but thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
So I got another quote here. And then Pops, you got one more. Molly, I think we have a couple. So we'll see how we're doing with time. But the next one I have comes from Lee Brackett from an interview he did with Writer's Digest. He says, plot is people. Human emotions and desires founded on the realities of life, working at cross purposes, getting hotter and fiercer as they strike against each other until finally there's an explosion. That's plot. And really I included this because of Teresa's question about what comes first, plot or character. Again, plot comes from character, but also characters can come from plot. And so if you think of it in the sense that somebody's trying to take over the world, you have a hero that's going to rise to the occasion. That character is born of that plot. But conversely, you've got the OCD cop whose wife has been murdered. That's character, and now the plot is the hunt to find his wife's killer. It's the one crime he cannot solve. And so you can do it can go either way, but the important thing, as we said earlier, is the two are inextricable. You cannot take one out and still have fiction. You need to have both. And so I really appreciated that quote there. What about you, Pops?
It is a good quote. That's one of the things we were talking about earlier, is that if you don't have character, you don't have plot. You don't have a storyline. So it all centers on character, but it also can center on the theme and the basic storyline. You need both. So that's why I'm so opposed to teaching people to choose a particular way to approach their project. You approach it the way that works, because it probably won't be the same for the next book. It'll be different. That's okay. Be flexible again. So yeah, plot is people. My next one comes from, and this is absolutely my positively favoritist book on writing ever. And so I did a little work for you. This is by Terry Brooks. He writes fantasy, and oddly enough, I don't read fantasy. I don't much care for fantasy. It's just a personal thing. There's nothing wrong with the genre. It's just not my cup of tea. But nonetheless, he's a former attorney turned writer, and he's got the best stuff, and he's probably the most open of any other writer writing a craft book that I know of. And the book is called Sometimes the Magic Works. Now, it's a little difficult to get. You can go to Amazon, I think, and get the paperback, but you're probably buying from a third party. So I suggest going to abebooks.com. It's Abe like Abe Lincoln, A-B-E, abebooks.com. Look for Sometimes the Magic Works, and you can pick up a used copy for about $3.50. And sometimes there won't even be postage on it, delivery charge. You just have to look.
Nice.
I get doing a lot of research on the Scopes trial, and I've got I don't know how many books through them, and I pay $3.50 for a book, and sometimes they just send it to me without any postage or delivery charges like that. And yeah, sure was a library book, but what do I care? I'm not looking for signed first copies. I'm looking for information inside the book.
Sure.
Here's what he writes, and I think this is the one I'm cheating on, where I actually have two quotes in one. So he writes this: writing is life. Writers need their writing. They need their imaginary worlds in order to find peace in or make sense of the real world. There is never a moment when I am not thinking about writing. I can't put it out of my mind entirely, even in the most trying of circumstances. You might as well ask me to stop breathing. Thinking about my writing is as much a function of my life. I'm hesitating there because I just noticed a little misspelling. Let me fix that real quick. But notice how personal it is for him. He has a great chapter in there, I think it's titled, You're Not All Here, Are You? And his wife says that to him while they're walking romantic moonlit night across this sandy beach, hand in hand. Just a wonderful romantic thing. And he's thinking about his book because he really has no other choice to do that. And I've heard people who've had family members go into the hospital who, while they're waiting for results and maybe they're praying, maybe they're talking to other people, but a part of their brain is going, I need to remember this for a book. for this one thing for a book. It just never ever stops. And so he does, I think, what most writers would keep to themselves. He admits to being addicted to writing. Perhaps we prefer passionate about writing, but what he's describing is an addiction. It's not just something he chooses to do. It's something he is compelled to do. And he goes on to say something else here. Let me give you the second part of this quote here. He says, "If I don't write, I become restless and ill-tempered." Does that sound familiar, Aaron? Didn't you just say that?
Mm-hmm.
If I don't write, I become restless and ill-tempered. I become dissatisfied. My reaction to not writing is both physical and emotional. That's interesting. I think he's the only one that's ever said that I've come across. I am incomplete without my work. I am so closely bound to it, so much identified by it, that without it, I think I would crumble into dust and drift away.
That's perfect.
Isn't that great? And I know what he's saying. I know exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
It's a compulsion, and I know when I don't write, I get really out of it. I get depressed. That's what happens to me. I don't get grumpy. I just get depressed, and that makes me grumpy.
I get super resentful of anything it is that's keeping me away from my writing. All of a sudden, I hate it. And not my family, but like I got to get an oil change. Now I hate my car, and I hate the mechanic too. I've got to go into town and do shopping. I just want to burn Stater Brothers down. Like, I'm supposed to be writing right now. Don't you know this? I'm exaggerating here to make a point. I'm not actually going to burn down Stater Brothers, so please don't.
Thank you for that clarification, because
I know, right? I'm going to be the prime suspect, and it's on air too, so it can't really get that back. So. Fantastic, way to go! But yeah, I heartily agree, and I'm thankful every day that I have a wife who understands that about me. And supports that and will give me the time I need to write. I guess it's kind of selfish on her part. She doesn't want grumpy husbands, so good for her. But Molly, you got another quote here?
I do. I've heard this attributed to Ernest Hemingway. David in the chat room said the same quote, and he attributed it to Red Smith.
Yeah, it's a little different quote. Yeah, Red Smith is open a vein, I think.
Yeah. The quote is, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed." And it's so true. Again, people don't, other non-writers, I guess, don't understand that it, yes, as creative as we are, as our brains work and our minds work, where we're able to pull characters and create worlds, it's still an effort to put them together cohesively in a manner that other people are going to want to enjoy them as much as we do. And to take what's inside of me and put it out there and expose my writing for somebody else to read or critique or devalue or perhaps value it more than I do, that's very intimidating. So yeah, there's a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into every single time that I sit down to write. I love that quote more than anything.
Absolutely, yeah. It's work, and it can be quite the experience. And it's your lifeblood. It's part of who you are. It's in us, not just to write, but creating that product. So yeah, though I don't sit down at a typewriter to do it. I don't think I've ever sat down at a typewriter to write. Just a computer. But Pop's got typewriters now.
He had 7 typewriters through the course of his career.
Only
I've
7?
got one just like it. Yeah, I've got the 1915 version of the Corona 3 that he got as a gift from his future wife.
Nice.
I don't have his. I have the same model. I don't have his.
Right.
Trust me. It wouldn't be in my house. I can guarantee it. It would be locked away because it'd be, I don't know how many thousands of dollars it would be. But I've got, I think, 3 typewriters that are the same models as what he used. He wasn't fixated on one brand, but yeah, that's what he did. He sat down at a typewriter.
Nice.
Let it run.
Well, I've got one more quote here, and then I think that's it. So we'll go to chat room after this. But this one, I had to get a Ray Bradbury quote in there, and I think this was my first Ray Bradbury quote. I can't remember if I did any more from him, but he says, and this guy is just incredible when it comes to figurative language. If I could be half the writer he is when it comes to figurative language, man, that would be all right with me.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Let the world burn through you. Throw the prism light white hot on paper." And again, we're conduits. We are conduits for our stories. They exist outside of us, and we are merely the vessel that they have chosen to use to accomplish their will and to birth themselves, as it were. And I know that sounds very ethereal and perhaps a little bit crazy, but it's that experience. I think every writer can tell you the breakthrough they had, the work that they were working on when they stopped trying to make things happen and started allowing things to happen. They stopped trying to say what they wanted to happen and listening instead to what the story said. And it's a magical moment. It's a special moment. And it's memorable. So I don't know. Does that seem too crazy to you guys?
No, it's kind of spot on.
Yeah, not to me. And Ray Bradbury would be one of those who would say, well, he's overwriting. He's almost using purple prose, but it's not. And he does it so stinking well that you kind of want to slap him. I once spoke at a school about writing, and I found out the only reason I was speaking there was Ray Bradbury, who is quite a bit older than me, now gone, sadly, but he was going to be there to speak. So I was filling in for Ray Bradbury. I didn't know that before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I've never met him. None of that had anything to do with me, but I still felt intimidated, standing where he was supposed to stand to teach this thing. He's that impressive. He's one of the rare geniuses, and not just science fiction. He gets tagged as a science fiction writer. He's really more science fantasy as a writer, but he did other things, and his way with words is amazing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Agreed.
I love that guy. His writing is incredible. So if you
Get him
haven't
on
had a chance to
audio
read
some
him,
way,
you
yeah. I'm sorry. Get him
That-
on audio if you can, and listen to it. Listen to Fahrenheit 451. Beautiful.
Oh, that would be good.
It's beautiful.
every metaphor, every simile designed with strategic precision, nothing by accident, just quality craft. And so if you're going to study somebody to try and learn how to write, he's one of the ones that you want to read. So
You know, that reminds me, we were talking about when we were just doing the quote. He's my favorite writer of craft books. I just talked about him. It'll come to me in just a second.
Terry Brooks?
Terry Brooks. Yeah. Not being able to not think about his writing. Ray Bradbury was the same way, and he was walking with his wife on a beach, and he sees this tore down. It was a bunch of metal, twisted metal, on the beach, and he said, "What is that dinosaur doing there?" And that became the story. 20,000. It came from 20,000 Fathoms or something. That became he wrote the screenplay and became a movie.
Oh, wow.
And he's just out, catching some rays and walking with his wife, and everyone else sees junk, and he sees an entire story.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Molly, do we have what do we have from the chat room tonight?
Well, I've been following up with it. Dave was pretty active. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Becky, Lindsay, and Tess DeGroot were able to join us just a few minutes ago, so they caught part of it. And Tess shared her favorite quote is by Patty Hill. "Writing is like wrestling an octopus into a mayonnaise jar." And, that's awesome. Becky says she actually did use a typewriter the first few years she started writing. She says she's old, but I don't think so because she's younger than me, and I'm not old. So get over it, Becky. And that's it. Oh, Dave asked the question, what is the difference between a style and a rut?
Oh, man. A rut is a style that nobody likes. I don't know. Like, I think of Cormac McCarthy, and I'd say he has a very similar style through at least all the books that I've read of his. But they're different enough. Each book is different enough, specifically in the dialogue of the characters, that it still feels fresh. And he's Cormac McCarthy, so I mean, it's just incredible stuff. I don't know. I think style is just the voice that you find that is your unique way of telling a story that is different from everybody else's. I don't know that you could qualify that as a rut. I think story ideas can be stuck in a rut where you're just telling the same story over and over with different characters. That I think is more of a rut. I don't know, Pops. What do you think?
Well, it can become a rut. A style will often identify the author, so you can get a few pages out of a Dean Koontz book and sometimes recognize it's Dean Koontz, but the real champion of that was Rod Serling. All you had to do is listen to a little bit of his dialogue, and you know what Rod Serling wrote. It's that way. Twilight Zone. You don't have to see who wrote it. You know when it's Rod Serling dialogue because it's almost abnormal, but he made it work. So his style is very recognizable, but the stories are always different and engage the viewer. In the case of Twilight Zone and in his other writings and scripts, it engaged the reader. Each one honestly, and they were different enough. So I think a rut is if you have to use the same words all the time in the same voice. Yeah, I don't know. I think a good story will change the writing, the style, and a good writer, the style will be a little different for each book.
Which also comes from an awareness of the author, or the audience rather, but an attentive author will pay attention to the needs of and the expectations of the audience as well. So, yeah, that's a tough one. Good question, Dave. Thanks for popping in and listening. You've caught quite a few now, so I appreciate that. Always glad to have you along. And I'm still working on the implausibles. So I wrote 2,000 words.
Agent Dave.
Agent Dave, special Agent Dave to me. And so, yes, I'm still diligently working on it. I was able to do some other things. 2,000 words yesterday, so good news for that. Anyhow, that's what we got today. So next week we will be looking at conflict. We've talked about character this month. Next month we'll be devoting to conflict, specifically balancing thought and action, how to increase conflict through thought, how to increase it through action, and finding the delicate balance between the two. It should be a lot of fun. Tune in for that. Don't forget to send us your questions to ask the author. You can do that at firstsinfiction@gmail.com or on our Facebook or Twitter page. Don't forget
First in Fiction podcast.
Yes. Yes. What did you think I said?
I'm pretty sure you left out podcast again.
Never do that. There's no evidence to say that I did.
No, especially not live on a podcast. That happens every week.
It's late. First in Fiction podcast at gmail.com.
You see your dad drinking his coffee because he's really not drinking. He's just trying to hide his laugh.
He's just shaking his head. So we do hope that
there he goes.
For that. And you can always find us at altongansky.com, frankly-my-dear-mojo.com, heatherluby.com when she's here. I'm hoping that she'll be able to join us again soon. And you can find me at aarongansky.com. So we do thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.